Welcome, everyone, to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross, and it is time for a preview of the 2025 BNP Paribas Open at Indian Wells. After a February that is spread across multiple time zones, multiple surfaces, has a lot of charm for the die-hard tennis fans, well, Indian Wells marks the beginning of a new chapter in the season. Everybody comes together for the first time since the Australian Open. It is the first Masters 1000 on the ATP side. And as always, this will be a quarter-by-quarter preview. If you're new to the channel, I will give dark horses, which are unseeded players most likely to go deep. I will talk about upset alerts, seeded players who I think are most likely to lose early, popcorn matchups, early round matches that I don't think you should miss, and of course, quarterfinal and final weekend predictions. But I want to begin with the court surface, which is always a talking point when it comes to Indian Wells, because for the last 25 years, in the landscape of hard court events, Indian Wells has always stood out as potentially the slowest, the grittiest, the bounciest, the most clay court-like. And there's been a change this year. The previous manufacturer, Plaxapave, is out. Laycold is in. Laycold is doing very well for themselves as a company because the U.S. Open uses them, Miami Open uses them, other tournaments use them as well. It's unclear exactly how this is going to affect things, but if you follow me on Instagram and X, you know how I feel about the press release that Indian Wells released in announcing this change, where it appeared that they are communicating that the reason for the change is to fall closer in line with the Miami Open. It reads as if the goal here is to make Miami and Indian Wells as close together as possible to achieve consistency. I think that stinks. I'm not a fan of that at all. I think it hurts the product. I think I have a pretty good, pulse of the community of tennis fans, at least highly engaged tennis fans. And in saying that, I think I have a good idea about how much conditions drive discourse and interest in the sport and the things that are happening on the court. And I think the more it gets homogenized, the more you get sameness, the worse the product is, which is why I was disappointed to read that press release. Now, we'll see how it plays. And by the way, again, just to be very clear about what I'm saying here, if you wanted to make an argument that Indian Wells has been too slow over the years and that they just needed to sort of move it in the other direction, if you wanted to make an argument that the tennis is going to be better now that the speed is a little bit faster, I will hear that argument just fine. Okay, and I don't even really want to have that discussion necessarily. But what I'm really saying is I think the goal of uniformity is a really crappy goal if you are trying to improve the experience of following tennis year-round. That's all I'm saying. So, unfortunately, I have to start on that note. Now, as far as how are the courts actually going to play, aside from what they said in their official communication and their announcement, obviously the weather conditions at Indian Wells versus Miami are completely different. So that in itself is going to be a contrast unless Laycold has dialed in the conditions in a way where they're trying to even it out with the court surface. We still should get kind of a contrast between the two Masters 1000 events here in March. But desert air is actually fast air. It's thin. It's low humidity. The ball actually travels faster through desert air, which is something that, the players always remarked on when it comes to Indian Wells, that the ball actually travels fast, but then it loses so much speed when it hits those gritty hard courts. That said, it's also, at Indian Wells, usually somewhat cool, certainly not as hot as it is in Miami, and somewhat windy, really windy for the first couple days of qualifying. I don't think it's going to be that windy for most of the main draw, but there is, I don't actually know the science behind it. There's usually wind in Palm Springs. And by the way, if you drive through that part of California, you'll see wind turbines everywhere. So they take advantage of the conditions to create some clean energy, just to give you an idea. Most of the feedback so far from qualifying is that the courts are still not playing fast, that it is still not server friendly. And that would make sense in cool temperatures and windy conditions. Those two things are going to lower hold rates, raise break rates, make it more difficult to dominate with serve and attack, and it's going to create more rallies. So when it comes to how I actually predicted this event, I am working under the assumption that it still will be on the medium slow end of hard courts. Maybe just a little less extreme. Reactions to the draw, it felt really unbalanced to me. On the top half, I felt like there were a lot of guys who I was kind of terrified to pick as far as I did. And I was looking at it. This happens all the time when I'm making my predictions. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh man, like I really, this is my pick. I can't believe this is my pick. And then on the bottom half, I had the opposite problem. It was just as hard, but instead there were too many guys who I wanted to move ahead, who I wanted to get behind as far as predicting a run. So I'll leave you with that tease, and I want to get to the quarter-by-quarter preview. But first, I want to tell you about one more thing that I'm looking forward to the night before the event even starts. 2 hours of mixed doubles mayhem, 10-point tiebreaks, hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line. It's the Tiebreak 10s event. 8 teams competing in a single elimination tournament. Again, Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern time, streaming on the Tiebreak 10s YouTube channel. The teams are loaded. You have couples playing together, Bolter and De Minaur, Tsitsipas and Badosa run it back. Ruud is playing with Sakkari. The Italians, Musetti and Paolini, are teaming up. The Poles, Swiatek and Hurkacz, are grouping. Rybakina and Fritz are going to be a team. And also Americans Tommy Paul and Madison Keys. I still remember last year's event like it was yesterday. In the final, Ben Shelton, just an unforgettable run of points here. He's down 8-7, playing with Emma Navarro in the championship match against Tsitsidosa. Who else? And look what Ben Shelton does on 3 points in a row here. First, he's going to recognize this great return by Emma, poach right away. He actually shanks this volley completely, but it doesn't matter, right? You put yourself in good position, you get on top of the net, you go find the ball, and even if you hit the frame, a lot of the time you still end up with a finish. So great move by Ben there, and excellent return by Emma. That makes it 8-all, and now it's Shelton on the return on the deuce side, cranks this backhand right at Badosa's feet, earns the short ball, goes up the middle, and gets the error. Such a smart play with the forehand. He could have probably taken that right at Tsitsipas, but by going up the middle, obviously, you don't take much risk at all, and he was able to make Badosa move. You attack some open space there, even going up the middle in doubles. Championship point, unfortunately for Paula Badosa here, it winds up on Ben Shelton's serve, which is never a position that you want to be in, especially not in a big moment. Ben, too hot to handle. And just like that, Shelton and Navarro, champions of the Tiebreak 10s. This year's event will air, again, live on the Tiebreak 10s YouTube channel, 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern time. And I will be hosting a post-tournament analysis show that will go up on their channel. So you have to subscribe to Tiebreak 10s on YouTube. You can check out the link in the description or go to youtube.com/Tiebreak10s to watch the event live and then catch my analysis afterwards. I appreciate it. And without further ado, let us get to this quarter-by-quarter prediction, starting with Alexander Zverev's quarter. Top seeds are Zverev, Tsitsipas, Rune, Tiafoe, Humbert, Mahach, and Pechi Pericard. My dark horse here is Misha Kecmanovic. My upset alert is Hugo Humbert. And my early popcorn is Zverev versus Kecmanovic or Griekspoor in round 2. I've talked about Kecmanovic having this almost automatic pattern every year where his best tennis comes in the first 3 months of the season. And I think these conditions are nice for him. He plays his best in returner-friendly hard court conditions where he can get into rallies, take the ball early, and change direction with the consistency that really suffocates and eats up opponents from the back of the court. He's had a very solid start to the year, so I like the tennis he's been playing. He's got an 11-5 record. He won the title in Del Rey in February, and he didn't have a bad loss all year until Altmaier last week in Acapulco. Guy's allowed to have a bad loss. Acapulco was insane also with all of the illness going around, so you never know. I'm not going to let that deter me from Kecmanovic as my upset pick. Now, the draw would be something that would deter me, because he's got Griekspoor first round. That feels like a very 50-50 match. Then he's got Zverev second round. So this is one of these dark horse picks that, technically unlikely to get out of the second round. I'll be the first to admit it. But the thing is, I didn't see anybody else in this quarter unseeded who I thought had a lot of potential to make a run and had an easy draw. If I saw two of those things, well, I would have made them the dark horse, but I didn't find anybody with that. So I'm going with the guy who I think is simply the best unseeded player in this section, and that's Misha Kecmanovic. And I'm going to save, I have more thoughts, but I'm going to save them for a little bit later. My upset alert is Hugo Humbert. He will play the winner of Munar and Nishikori, and each of them obviously present very different challenges. I think Munar in particular could bother Hugo with the variety, the kind of shape he plays with, the way he changes heights constantly, and how tough his defense is. If these conditions are slow enough where Humbert can't, maintain a really high sort of finishing rate, and, if he can't get the ball through the court quite easily, that's when he really suffers against a player like Munar. And traditionally, this court has been too slow for Humbert. So we'll see if that changes. But I think he's got a dangerous first round or dangerous first match, regardless of who wins that. And he always tends to be a little bit vulnerable on these North American hard court events. My popcorn match is Zverev versus the winner of Griekspoor Kecmanovic. As I've kind of alluded to, if I have to pick, it's Kecmanovic. Sasha can be a slow starter at tournaments. He had, he struggled in February. He went to play the Golden Swing. I have to imagine the reason for that is just appearance fee. I can't think of any real logic behind playing the clay in February if you're Alexander Zverev. Obviously, he doesn't need it for his ranking. Like so many of the players who play the Golden Swing in South America, they do it because they have a chance to get some results, and it helps their ranking, and it helps them, make more money than they would in Europe. For Zverev, that normally wouldn't be the case. So I imagine he was there to collect checks, which is fine. I'm not hating. I was not surprised that he struggled, given the questions about motivation, given the questions about the hangover effect from what could be a pretty scarring loss in the Australian Open final, just given how much he was dominated and how negative he felt after that final. And then the third thing is this sudden pressure he's now under when it comes to him having a chance to become number one in the world. And I think those three things put Zverev in a pretty tough spot. Now, he owned Talon Griekspoor last year. And Kecmanovic, he's, 2-1 head-to-head against him. But I think this could be close if Sasha doesn't kind of step up his level. Overall, as we get to my quarterfinal prediction, largely for the reasons I just mentioned, I am not putting Zverev through this quarter. I have Tsitsipas over Zverev in the quarterfinal here. For Tsitsipas, it's an interesting history with Indian Wells. I basically pledged last year I'm not going to pick Tsitsipas to do well at Indian Wells ever again, because year after year after year, I felt like, oh wow, these conditions should suit Stefanos. And I've always thought, look, I know he hasn't done well at the event in the past, but you know what? I just think that he's going to turn it around because it doesn't make any sense to me. And last year, I was like, that's it. That's it. I'm done picking Tsitsipas at Indian Wells. And here I am. I promised myself I wasn't going to do it again, and here I am. Because that is how, I guess, earth-shaking in Tsitsipas world that Dubai run was. If the confidence is back, that's a huge deal. And I like him in every matchup. Berrettini is in his section, could be a third-round match. He's in good form. He likes the lively bounce. But when Tsitsipas plays at his best, I just don't see how Matteo breaks serve. I just can't see it. The Zverev matchup has treated Tsitsipas really well because Steph has always been pretty comfortable hitting through Zverev's counterpunching with his forehand and his transition, and Sasha just gives him too much space, too much time to operate with. Last year I know Zverev beat him in Paris, but Stefanos had a horrible forehand day, and it doesn't look like Tsitsipas is in that kind of place with his confidence anymore. Now, I'm worried about jet lag. I'm worried about the hangover. I'm worried about the history at Indian Wells, where his overall record is 7-6. But I just have to look past it because I think if he plays up to his abilities like he did last week, and this racket has sort of fixed the broken psyche and the broken confidence, yeah, that's that. All right, let us now move on to the 4-seed Casper Ruud Quarter. Top seeds are Ruud, Medvedev, Paul, Musetti, Fils, Lehechka, Popyrin, and Mickelson. My dark horse here is Riley Opelka. My upset alert is Alexei Popyrin. And my early popcorn match is Medvedev versus the conditions. Let us start by discussing Riley Opelka. I do not have an unseeded player making a run in this quarter. I really struggled to choose a dark horse because I looked up and down and I thought, I just don't see it. In fact, I think that this is the weakest quarter, just in general. So I decided to go with Opelka because he's a guy who, when he is at his peak level, like when he's on, I know it's top 20 stuff. Now, sometimes he's way off. I don't think he's the kind of guy who brings consistency week to week to the table. But when he's on, it's top 20 stuff, and that makes him dangerous. And his hope will be that Lorenzo Musetti, who is his closest seed, isn't 100%. Musetti has been having calf issues. I don't think he's completed a match since the Australian Open, if my memory serves. So he hasn't been healthy. He might get a compromised Musetti. Then if Opelka can, get a couple of wins under his belt and some momentum, we know how tough he can be. My upset alert is Alexei Popyrin. He's never been past the second round in Indian Wells. He has a history of occasional long, drawn-out losing streaks, and he's on one of them right now. He has not been good in 2025. In fact, his last top 100 win was the Paris Masters last year over Medvedev. Kind of crazy that it's over Medvedev, but the real point is that it was a long time ago. And in his first match, he will play either Zizou Bergs, Zizou, who's won 14 matches this year, Auckland final, Marseille semifinal, or a qualifier, somebody who would be on a 3-match win streak. So I don't think that bodes well for Popyrin. Popcorn match, Medvedev versus the conditions. Look, when you saw the news about the court changing, Daniil had to be the first person you thought of. He has battled these courts year after year after year. He's been able to make some runs at Indian Wells despite his negativity towards the surface. Right? Remember, I'm a hard court specialist. This isn't a hard court. I don't want to play on this surface. Actually, that might have been somewhere else where he said, I don't want to play on this surface. But the point is, Medvedev has not enjoyed Indian Wells. So it's going to be really interesting to see, how does he feel out here? Especially because the overall narrative with Medvedev right now is one that reeks of desperation and some urgency to turn things around. And by the way, I saw some good signs in Dubai. I think Daniil actually looked good. I think he's actually serving a little bit bigger than he did last year. Physically, the quickness and the speed around the court actually looked really good in February. I just thought Griekspoor, in particular, played an insanely good match in conditions that suit him. He was ridiculously good. I actually think Medvedev played well. We'll see how he fares here at Indian Wells, but I think it's a huge storyline. And without a particular matchup that really jumped out to me in this quarter, for me, the most intriguing part is it's just going to be watching Daniil here. Quarterfinal prediction. I've got Ruud defeating Alex Michelsen. Let's start with the fact that I have not picked Daniil Medvedev to the quarterfinals. I think the draw is tough. He'll open against either Buyun Chaukete or Nishesh Basavareddy. Ultra consistent guys. Alex Michelsen as well has the ability to be extremely consistent. Sometimes the forehand, not so much. But when he wants to be, he can be patient. He can work a point. He can dig in physically as far as his rally tolerance is concerned. And in slow conditions, I'm concerned about Medvedev against that kind of player. I don't fully trust him right now. He's got to show me something. Alex Michelsen, first of all, I think he's playing great, and I think he's due for a breakout. So that's sort of at a big event, which hasn't really come, although I suppose he did make some noise at the Australian Open, of course. But he loves a high bounce. He's much better when the ball's bouncing up high. He's a Southern California guy who I think embraces the sort of big event feel. And I think he'll really prioritize this motivationally. I think the focus is going to be ultra high for Michelsen. So I'm deciding to take a shot on him. Ruud has an extremely favorable section. He is playing solid hardcourt tennis in the first 2 months of the season. The backhand is way tougher to attack than it used to be. The court position is much better than it was in 2022, certainly, or sorry, in 2023, certainly, and probably even a little bit better than it was last year. The forehand confidence is there. The only problem is he can sometimes get dominated on a hard court in the serve return dynamic. But given these conditions and his draw, I think he'll be okay. This is a quarter I mentioned. I feel it's the weakest quarter. That also means that I could see a lot of outcomes here. Tommy Paul would be in consideration. But Lorenzo Musetti, I don't think he's healthy enough. Arthur Fils, I don't think the confidence is there for him right now. Lehechka, consideration. No doubt a consideration. I'm going to go with the consistency and the steadiness that I know you get from Casper Ruud. Taylor Fritz is the number 3 seed. We move on to his quarter, where the top seeds are Fritz, Rublev, Shelton, Draper, FAA, Khachanov, Tabilo, and Nakashima. My dark horse here is the teens. Upset alert is Ben Shelton. Early popcorn is Fonseca versus Draper in round 2. There are 3 top 100 teenagers on the ATP Tour. Jakub Mensik, Lerner Tien, Joao Fonseca. They are all in this quarter. Assessing them individually, I do think Mensik needs conditions that allow him to do a lot of serve damage and rush the net. And that's where I think he's particularly dangerous. Now, he can be steady and he moves well from the back of the court, but I don't think the ball striking is yet at the level, particularly under pressure, where he's winning baseline rallies consistently when he needs to. And therefore, I don't love these conditions for him. Fonseca has a really tough draw. It's Jacob Fernley in the first round, then Draper, plus you have the hard court adjustment because he played the Golden Swing. That all just seems very tough to me. It seems difficult. I think Tien probably has the best chance to make noise at a venue he's familiar with, given his draw, which leads me well into my upset alert, Ben Shelton, because I do think that Tien will get the better of Ben Shelton. Tien is so good at keeping the ball out of the middle of the court. Shelton is so much better when he can operate from the middle with his forehand. He is so compromised when he needs to play out of the corners. And in general, I think Tien is going to do a great job playing through Ben's backhand. He has the precision to change direction with that forehand line, get out of that forehand to forehand pattern. He's so precise on his backhand cross court that I think he can really keep Ben at bay in the deuce side cross court. And I even think the extra balls that Tien can come up with may have an impact, because Shelton can have some hiccups finishing here and there against guys who really get a good volume of balls back in play, like Lerner Tien. My popcorn match, however, is Joao Fonseca versus Jack Draper. This would be fascinating. I would love to see this. I think there's a serve, and of course, Joao would need to beat Jacob Fernley, which is not easy. There would be, if we do get Fonseca versus Draper, clear serve and consistency advantage for Jack, but a pretty large ground stroke potency advantage for Fonseca. And that's kind of the matchup that you'd be looking at. It'd be a lot of fun. Quickly, we get to the quarterfinal matchup, the quarterfinal prediction. I am tired, guys, so I'm misspeaking more than usual. A little bit delirious. My quarterfinal prediction is Taylor Fritz defeats Andrei Rublev. You know, as I was saying that, I feel like they've played at Indian Wells before. I'm almost positive of that. I had this flash of memory. Let's start with Rublev, who I'm picking to the quarterfinal here. I thought it was a really important February bounce back for Rublev winning Doha. I think he can build on it. The conditions should be slow enough for him to get into rallies where he can use his ball striking and get some rhythm, where his power really comes out. And as for Taylor Fritz, you know, nothing about 2025 and the results we've seen from Taylor have made me feel positive about the American. But we're early enough in the season where I'm still valuing and going off of some of my preseason convictions. And one of my preseason convictions was that Taylor Fritz was going to be able to, in some way, replicate what he did in 2024. If it doesn't happen here, if he can't do it here after a tough Australian Open, a couple of disappointing results in February, although he was dealing with an ab injury, so take that with kind of a grain of salt. Still, if it doesn't happen here for Fritz, you start worrying about a letdown season. This has been an event that he has loved dearly. The level of motivation is going to be extremely high, and I think he'll be hungry because he hasn't been able to make a run thus far in 2025. There's that really tough section with FAA, who's been just phenomenal this year. Jack Draper, when he's played this year, he's been incredible. And Fonseca. That's all in one little section. First through third round matchups. I like all those guys. And I have to stay away from that section when picking a quarterfinalist. That was another reason I'm going with Fritz here, because I want no part of that. I don't know who gets out of that gauntlet. And, you know, maybe that's a bit of a crutch for me when I'm making predictions, is I stay away from tough parts of the draw, even though we see all the time players emerge from tough parts of the draw and make deep runs. But I'm a little bit at a loss when it comes to who I like there. And Taylor doesn't need to deal with that. He'll only need to play one of them. Another thing I'll say is Fritz has always found himself pretty comfortable against Rublev on hard courts. He has a 4-1 record against Rublev on hard court, not counting Next Gen, Fast Four, and Laver Cup, which I never like to count Laver Cup. So those two aside, which would make it 5-2, it's 4-1 Fritz. He has a good ability to sort of out Rublev. And the big serve. The big serve is key against Andre. No doubt. Last but not least, we head to the Carlos Alcaraz Quarter, the number 2 seed. Top seeds are Djokovic, De Minaur, Dimitrov, Hurkacz, Korda, Cerundolo, and Shapovalov. Really intriguing quarter here. My dark horse is Gael Monfils. My upset alert is Francisco Cerundolo. And my early popcorn is Djokovic versus Kyrgios or a qualifier in round 2. Gael Monfils, at the ripe age of 38, won 8 matches in a row in January. And then he kind of rested up after his Australian Open run and his Adelaide run. It was Adelaide, right? Am I getting that right? I think so. His holds rate through 10 matches this season is 90%. Like, this is a John Isner holds rate through 10 matches. The sample size is small. That would never continue over the course of the year. But the point is, Monfils balled out in January, and then he got some rest, which he needs because he's old. Meanwhile, the seeds in his section are Dimitrov and Korda. Grigor has had a nightmare season with the injuries. And Korda, I don't know what to expect out of him. I don't know why he's been so inactive. It would seem to me like, Seb would want matches right now. Build some confidence, build some match toughness. He didn't really play in February. I'm not sure why. I don't know if he was injured or if that was just his choice. But I think Monfils is in a good section, and he's played awesome tennis so far this year. And he's got some good history at Indian Wells. Upset alert is Francisco Cerundolo. He played clay all through February, including Santiago. I think I would have felt a little bit better about Cerundolo. And I don't blame him for this. I just think it hurts him at Indian Wells, more likely than not. I would have felt better if he played the clay and then he played Acapulco, as opposed to Santiago. He's never been past the second round in Indian Wells. It has been a lot of tennis for him, if you combine January and February. And he faces the winner of Mackie McDonald and Alejandro Davidovich Fokina. I think it's going to be Foki here. And I think I like Foki there. I think Davidovich Fokina would be my pick over Cerundolo, given the way Alejandro has been playing. My popcorn match, Djokovic versus Kyrgios or a qualifier. How likely are we to get Djokovic Kyrgios? I mean, honestly, I would favor the qualifier, whoever it is. I don't know who it's going to be, obviously, but I would favor the qualifier. I think what we saw with Nick struggling with his wrist in Australia was just super concerning. Like, when somebody comes off of 2 years off because of an injury, and then when they come back, the injury still seems to be in some way present. That's just a terrible sign. So I'm concerned about Kyrgios' health. He hasn't won a match since October of 2022. So I think it very well might be a qualifier. But, even so, I'd be happy to watch Novak Djokovic open up his campaign in Indian Wells. And therefore, I will have no regrets about making this the popcorn match. Let's get right to the quarterfinal prediction. Because obviously, this was juicy from the start when you saw the draw come out. And I do think it's going to happen, folks. And I've got Alcaraz over Novak Djokovic in the Indian Wells quarterfinal. Now, let's start here. It's the only place to start. I have been comically bad. It is impressive how wrong I have been on Djokovic-Alcaraz predictions. So let's break this down. Head-to-head, Djokovic has a 5-3 lead. Madrid 2022, I don't remember. I don't remember what my pick was. But I remember the other 7 that we've had since. And I've picked 2 out of the 7 correct. When they played in Cincinnati, I picked Djokovic. That was correct. And I picked Djokovic at the ATP Finals. That was also correct. The other 5, I was wrong. So, there's your primer. I'm going to pick Alcaraz here because of the calendar spot. Djokovic has not made a quarterfinal at Indian Wells since 2016. His results at Miami, similarly, underwhelming in the last, 5 or so years. His results at Monte Carlo, similarly, underwhelming in the last 5 or so years. People, this is not a coincidence. I tell you guys this every year. And every year I pick against Djokovic, so to speak, at these events. And I always get that never doubt Djokovic. Just don't ever pick against Djokovic. I always get these comments. At least in this case, he proves me right over and over and over again. And I'm not saying that's going to continue necessarily or that it's going to, happen every time. But there's no motivation in March. There's no motivation in the first week of April. And that has made it very difficult for Novak to succeed. He has said his priorities are the slams. And with that in mind, I think it is difficult for him to keep himself in peak condition at this time of year. Alcaraz, on the other hand, back-to-back defending champion here at Indian Wells. He is young enough. He can stay peak fitness all year. Now, mentally, I think he's had trouble being at his peak all year in his early career, but physically he can do it. And we have seen him year after year, Alcaraz, not play his best in Australia necessarily, but this place always seems to fix everything. In fact, given how he played in Rotterdam, this is probably a better, a more confident version of Alcaraz coming into this Indian Wells compared to last year. And with that, we've arrived at the final weekend prediction, which will be revealed in 3, 2, 1. I've got Tsitsipas over Ruud in 3. I've got Alcaraz over Fritz in straights. And I've got Alcaraz over Tsitsipas in straight sets. Tsitsipas over Ruud, I just got to go with that early firepower advantage. When Ruud faces the best serve forehand players on hard court, I think he tends to get bullied a little too much. As for Taylor Fritz against Carlos Alcaraz, historically it's just been tough for Fritz to go up against the tier 1 guys. He just operates at an athletic disadvantage that makes it difficult for him. I think against Alcaraz, he'd need to try to just kind of crush every ball, play that high-risk redliney style. Taylor actually doesn't love playing that way. For the final, Tsitsipas, this is well documented. He has always felt really uncomfortable with Alcaraz's weight of shot. And overall, he's been psyched out in this matchup. Now, of course, he'd be on a huge winning streak coming in if he does make the final. But I'm going Carlos to continue his dominance over Tsitsipas. Indian Wells, Carlos Alcaraz, can't really go wrong. Didn't pick him last year. Felt stupid. Even though the courts are different, it's going to be, the conditions probably won't fit his game like a glove like they have in years past. I still think he's the answer right now, especially with the question marks that I have against the guys who would traditionally, challenge him to the largest extent. That would be Novak Djokovic. I don't like the calendar spot. Alexander Zverev. I've got a lot of questions about him right now and the situation that he's in. So Carlos Alcaraz it is. Content plan for Indian Wells, I'm not exactly sure. I am going to be calling matches the first 6 days of Indian Wells, which means I'll be busy, but I'll be locked into the tournament. And then I go to Phoenix, call the Phoenix Challenger like I did last year, and therefore very difficult to even keep eyes on Indian Wells. Obviously, the final, I'll be watching it. I'll be breaking it down on Monday Match Analysis, as always. But the coverage of the second half of Indian Wells is going to be a little bit scaled back. So thought I'd give you a heads up there. But there should be more coming soon for me, at least in the first week. Maybe a mailbag. We'll see. Tune in to Tiebreak 10s. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.